My hands were warmed by the chip cup. The cold knot in my chest was not being eased by the lukewarm coffee, as the rain whipped against the tempest raging inside of me is reflected in the kitchen window. 3 weeks had passed since I discovered the texts. After 3 weeks, the meticulously crafted regular C broke into a million jagged shards. 3 weeks of pretending to be an ignorant husband when my entire being ached from knowing that she had betrayed me. Sarah, my Sarah, the woman I had formed a relationship with and whom I believed to know better than I actually did, had been having an affair. This was not a brief moment of indiscretion while intoxicated, rather, it was a carefully planned covert relationship with a co-worker named David, whom she told me she hardly knew, and I had seen the evidence, the suggestive messages. The secret lunch dates, the horrifying pet names are a continual reminder of her deceit, each one causing a new hurt. The globe seemed to be shifting on its axis for the first few days I had been there. I had taken a stroll around the home. The familiar places feel suddenly strange, haunted by her phantom laughter and the echo of promises that have since been broken. I had wanted to confront her, scream, and demand answers, but something held me back. Perhaps it was the lingering effects of love, or perhaps it was a perverse desire to see how long she could keep up this act. I had asked her about her day, listened to her make-believe stories, and even managed a weak smile when she described a particularly awful office lunch. The effort required to maintain that facade was exhausting, but it gave me a perverse sense of control. I observed her, studied her, and noted the subtle changes in her behavior, the lingering glances at her phone, the nervous fidgeting, the forced intimacy. She had been especially blatant, spending the entire weekend with him under the pretense of a work conference and returning home late Sunday night with a well-crafted story about late-night networking and early morning presentations. This morning, as we sat across from each other at the breakfast table, I had asked her how the conference had gone, but her eyes hadn't met mine, so she said, "Oh, it was fine," with a twisted sense of satisfaction. "You know, sometimes I believe you worry too much," she remarked, her voice laced with a mocking sweetness, before a smoke flickered on her lips and a subtle arrogant twist sent a chill down my spine. ATT touched her too casually, pretty standardly. She regarded me as an idiot who could be manipulated and dominated at that precise moment, and the words that hung in the air were heavy and offensive. They weren't simply about my alleged concern, they were about power and control, and they confirmed all I already knew. "You're not in charge, you know." Something triggered the anger that had been building for weeks, but instead of blowing up, it hardened into an icy resolve. I pushed back my chair as the scraping sound reverberated through the quiet kitchen, and she gave me a confused look. "You're right, Sarah." I spoke quietly, and even though I'm not in control, this is my house. As I made my way to the bedroom, the only sound I could hear was the rain hammering rhythmically against the window pane. I carefully started packing, folding her clothes, shoes, and toiletries after removing her luggage from the top of the closet. Her deceit seemed to scream from every object I touched. The pricey perfume I got her for Christmas, the red dress she wore on our anniversary, and the work t-shirts she enjoyed sleeping in each of them, and when signs of love now felt like taunting reminders of her adultery, she would show up in the doorway and watch me. Her voice was almost a whisper as she inquired, her eyes wide with a mix of shock and amazement. "What are you doing?" "Unpacked your luggage." I looked back without flinching, but she asked, "Are you serious?" with a hint of panic in her voice. "You can't be serious," she said. "But I'm very serious, Sarah." She said, "I'm not in charge and you're right, I'm not going to try to control you or your actions, but I can control who lives in my home." I continued packing, ignoring her protests and pleas. She tried to convince me to apologize and deny everything, but I didn't listen, and everything she said sounded false. It was too late to apologize. She was hollow and dripping with the same dishonesty that she had been feeding me for weeks. When the suitcase was filled, I zipped it shut with a sound like a final proclamation and walked past her while lugging the bulky bag, knowing that the trust and affection had been irreparably broken. She followed me as my footsteps reverberated in the abrupt hush. I didn't answer, I just opened the door, put the suitcase on the porch, and stepped back inside. Her jaw dropped as I reached for the door handle. "I can," and I just did. I looked at her, my eyes locking with hers, showing none of the rage that burned inside me, just pure resolute finality. Her voice rose in a desperate attempt to regain some semblance of control. "Where do you think you're going?" she screamed, blocking the front door. "I might not have control over you." Sarah, but because you reside here, with a wonderful sense of completion, I shut the door and the lock clicked into position. I turned slowly and made my way back into the living room. The silence was deafening, the house felt lighter and empty, and I didn't feel any sadness or anger. Instead, I felt a strange sense of calm and freedom that I hadn't experienced in years. The betrayal was still there, a raw wound, but it wasn't consuming me anymore. It had been painful, but it had also finally given me back the control I had been longing to regain. I went to the window to watch her through the glass as the rain had stopped and a sliver of sunlight was peeking through the clouds. She stood on my porch, gazing at the door with a look of incredulity and rage on her face. Her bag, a vivid reminder of her banishment, was at her feet. I simply felt free. I could rebuild, I could recover, I could meet someone who would love me, without feeling sorry or guilty. To be honest, when she eventually turned and vanished down the street, I forced myself to drink a fresh cup of coffee because it tasted so much better this time.